Arnold Schwarzenegger says that alpha male is bullshit. Uh-oh, or kind of, sort of. So a little while back, Arnold Schwarzenegger, he has now kind of moved into the self-help space. Arnold Schwarzenegger, by the way, if you didn't know, is one of my all-time heroes, all-time mentors. He is objectively one of the most singular, successful individuals in world history. He came to this country without speaking English. He went from zero to the top of his sport, bodybuilding. Then he became a multimillionaire in business through mail order and various other things. Then he became a multimillionaire again in commercial real estate. Then he became the highest paid actor in Hollywood in history up until that point. Then he married into American royalty, the Kennedy family. Then he became governor of California, the seventh largest economy in the world. I mean, it's just win after win after win. Bill Burr said that Arnold Schwarzenegger has been in the zone for 40 years, and he kind of has. So I have a lot of respect for Schwarzenegger. No, he fucked up on that thing with the maid. I wrote about that in my blogs at the time. You're welcome to go read those articles. Outside of that, I love him to death. I do not like his politics. He is a left-wing guy in most respects, even though he calls himself a Republican. But no one can be perfect. So some of you actually sent me this article. He wrote a blog post on Medium. He writes blog posts and email newsletters and stuff like that now. And he was asked about men's mental health, the mental health crisis among men. And the answer is, I'm going to go through what he said, and you will note, by the way, I will leave the link to this article that he wrote in the description of this video. I'm going to go through this. I agree with some of his points, and at some of these points, he contradicts himself. Interesting. So let's go through this. All right, so here's what he says. Wow, this is a big one. I want to first acknowledge to the psychologist, I want to first acknowledge the psychologist that commented asking me to remind my audience there's nothing wrong with therapy. Okay, I agree 100%. I've talked about this in a previous newsletter, but you should treat your mind no differently than you treat your body. You have to train both. If your knee was holding you back and making you limp everywhere, you'd see a physical therapist. There's no shame in all admitting that you need help with your mind. None. In fact, if you're thinking about giving money to some guru who promises to make your life perfect, spend it on a therapist instead. Let's train those minds. Okay, I agree. You have seen me, if you've watched my content for a long time, you've seen me sometimes in the comments on my videos or blog posts or things like that, where I tell guys, dude, you need therapy. You need to go see a counselor. I don't want to go see a counselor. I tried that once and counselors are assholes. Yeah. So I've talked about this. Sometimes you need therapy. If it's severe enough, you need to go. And you follow what I call the rule of three, which means you hire the first therapist, you go talk to him or her. Probably want him to be a him if you're a man, but it's up to you. And he will probably suck. Assume in advance he will suck. You'll have to fire him. Get a second guy. Assume in advance he will suck. You'll have to fire him. The third guy will be the one. Okay? And if you get the first or the second one, great. You usually get the third one, and that's part of life. So I 100% agree. I think therapy can help to a degree. You need it's a certain kind of therapist, and we could do a whole thing on therapy. I don't want to get in the weeds on that, but let's move on. He says, so back to the question. I don't know what's going on with men's mental health. I see articles about a mental health crisis among men, but I also see articles about a mental health crisis among women and girls. It seems like we just have a human crisis. All right, let me correct you, Arnold. We don't have a human crisis. We have a young person crisis. So yes, girls are fucked up too. Young men and young women. I believe the statistics on young people getting transgender reassignment surgery, I don't know what you call it. We used to call it sex change back in the 80s. I don't know what the politically correct word is for it now because I'm an old man. But it's something like 90% of young people or people under 20 who surgically change their genders are girls going to boys. Well, that's interesting. That tells you right there's something wrong. Shouldn't it be about 50-50? It's not. It's like 90-10. Very few boys are going to girls. It's all girls going to boys. That tells you right there it's bullshit. And that tells you right there's some issues going on. Now, I'm not going to get the transgender thing. I have my own opinions about that. Not strong opinions. My dad is a psychologist with 40 years of experience. I've talked to him a lot about these things. I don't really care, but I don't want to get in the weeds of that. But yes, so it's not a human crisis, Arnold. It is a young person crisis. And by the way, this is a symptom of Western collapse, particularly cultural collapse. Correct. Moving on with what he says. I am not an expert. You'd be better off asking the psychologist who asked me to make a comment about therapy, but you wanted my opinion, so I'll share it. I am simple, so I ask myself, what changed? And here's what I see. Social media. Agree, I'll cover that in a second. People spend all day online, and there's lots of bullshit artists and charlatans and outraged salespeople on the internet. The quote influencers to tell you that you have to wear this or you're worthless. The people who tell you the world is falling apart, even though by most measures it is better than ever. Well, let's pause right there. Two things. First of all, I have a podcast from a few months ago where I tackled the question, is social media a net negative or net positive for humanity? And I was forced to answer, and originally up until then, my answer was a net positive. However, in that podcast, and I still believe this, I stand by this, I think it is a net negative, particularly for Americans. I think it's a net positive for other countries outside the West, growing countries. I think those are really benefited by social media, but all it's done with Americans, not all it's done, but in terms of the negative outweighing the positive, it's made Americans furious and angry and pussies and jealous, and it's made Americans hateful, Americans in particular, Westerners too. So I agree with him on that. I agree. I'm not on Twitter. I got to be on Twitter. I'll be back on Twitter soon, but there's a reason I've been off Twitter. It's just a fucking cesspool. Now, for business reasons, I have to be there, and I will because I like money, but I acknowledge social media is actually a net negative in my view. Okay. Now, what he's talking about is people who tell you the world is falling apart, even though by most measures it is better than ever. That is incorrect. By some measures, it is better than ever. I have done entire podcasts and articles on that. Technological growth, yes. And wars, yes. It's a much more peaceful period now than more than ever before in human history. There are lots of wonderful, wonderful aspects to being alive today. Clean water, access to water, literacy. There are a lot of measures by which things are great. But there's a hell of a lot if you live in the collapsing Western world. That's a big if. Not now if you live in China or Asia or Africa or South Africa, South America. But if you live in the collapsing Western world, particularly America, I'm 51. I've lived in America for 40. I lived in America, 49 years? For 49 years, every decade I saw my country get worse by every measurement there was, minus technology. I've talked about this. Crime rates, real wages, stock market bubbles, inflation, taxes, cost of living, homelessness. All these things have gotten worse. Joblessness, the real unemployment rate. All these things have gotten worse throughout my entire lifetime and continue to get worse. So they're both true. One of my titles, one of my podcasts was, it's the best time to be alive and it's the worst time to be alive. So Arnold, these guys aren't wrong and you're not wrong. You're both right. In many respects, it's the best time to be alive. But these guys are also right. Now, sometimes they go too far. I love Doug Casey. I love Peter Schiff. I love these guys, but they go too far. Many times these guys have said, oh yeah, the economy's going to collapse next October. It's going to collapse next year. And they're always wrong, and it doesn't. Now, eventually they'll be right. So they overdo it, but they're not wrong in terms of the macro. All right, moving on. Or, this is his quote now, or the shysters who tell you some bogus class about how to be a man. I'll give you guys a hint. Nobody needs a class on that. Really, Arnold? Have you seen men today? Wrong. Objectively wrong. Now, later in this letter, he demonstrates why he thinks this. So I will circle back to that in a minute and describe why he thinks no one needs a class how to be a man, why Arnold Schwarzenegger thinks that. Okay? But is that true? No. Men need a lot more than a class on how to be a man. They need a lot more. We have a crisis right now of masculinity, especially among younger men. It's awful. So yes, they do. They need more than a class. But we'll circle back to that because, like I said, he contradicts himself a few times. And going on, and no one who is a real leader goes around calling themselves an alpha. It's absurd. If anyone did that in Gold's Gym, we would have laughed until they stopped. All right. I've received that criticism in the past from haters, random haters. You call yourself an alpha. Anyone who calls himself an alpha is an alpha. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you think I walk around my day-to-day life calling myself an alpha male? Hey, I'm an alpha male. You think I've ever said that my entire life? Do you think I have ever said the word alpha in my life outside of my internet content? Unless directly asked about it. Ever in my entire life. My work life, my presentation life, my personal life, going to the gym, friends, family, ever. Have I ever said that word? Do you think? No, I don't. So you're right. I have a brand called Alpha Male 2.0 that is a branding technique that I use to sell products. I'm very obvious about this. I'm a capitalist. I'm here on the internet selling stuff. The reason I'm doing this YouTube video is not the goodness of my heart. I'm doing this YouTube video so that you'll watch the video, like my video, watch more of my videos, and eventually buy something from me. That's my ulterior motive that I've been public about since I started doing this in 2009. I'm here to make money. And so one of the techniques I use to make money is something called branding, and Alpha Male 2.0 is part of that branding. But I don't walk around ever calling myself an alpha male or an alpha. So I agree with him. That would be very silly if I walked, excuse me, I'm an alpha male. Yeah, see, I need to use that machine. I'm here at the gym. I'm an alpha male. Yeah. That'd be awesome. I should do that when they say, excuse me, I'm an alpha male. Imagine doing that on a first date with a girl. Yeah, my name's Caleb. I'm an alpha male. So yes, guys who walk around calling themselves alpha are stupid. Now let's be real about this. How many guys on the internet, including in the red pill space, walk around calling themselves an alpha male? The only one I can think on the top of my head is Dan Pena. And he's a corny son of a bitch anyway, right? And I say that with love. But okay, moving on to what he says. Let's see, I lost my place here. Here we go. Social media has caused a crisis of confidence because people lose their sense of purpose scrolling feeds all day. Correct. They're told to be scared and they're told they aren't good enough. Correct. We need to sign off and build up confidence in the real world, which I talked about earlier this week, as something you do by taking a small step with the thing that makes you uncomfortable and then taking a bigger step on and on. You don't need to project this crap on the internet. That's fake confidence. The real kind takes work and constant reps and feeling uncomfortable. Agree, 100%. And too many people shy away from all of those things. Right. But Arnold, you just said men don't need a class how to be a man. He goes on. I think people aren't willing, this is in bold now, I think people aren't willing to feel a little out of their comfort zone for even a minute. But life isn't going to be comfortable all the time, so it throws them out of whack when they hit the crappy parts. Arnold, you just said men don't need a class on how to be a man. Yet then, just within another paragraph, you say people aren't willing to feel a little out of their comfort zone even for a minute. Now, Arnold, let me ask you a question, Arnold. Was it like that in the 1970s when you were lifting your weights at Gold's Gym and training to be a champion? Is that how men were? Were they like that? Were they a little uncomfortable to be a little other? No, they weren't. I grew up in the 80s. I remember it very clearly. Men were not like this in the 80s. They weren't like this in the 70s. They weren't like this in the 60s. They weren't like this in the early 90s. Now, by the time the mid-90s, that's when it started. And that's when it got worse and worse and worse every decade. Yes, Arnold, you just contradicted yourself. You just proved that men do need help in terms of being a man. More now than ever before, and it's going to get worse. You see how easy it is to contradict yourself? Arnold, and I love you. I worship you. I bow down to you. You just contradicted yourself. Men need a lot of fucking help because, I quote you, Arnold, they aren't willing to feel a little out of their comfort zone even for a minute. And you are right. Have you seen Gen Z men? Have you seen millennial men? Have you seen a lot of men my age? A lot of these, married beta males, they're 50s. Have you seen these fucking guys? You're absolutely right. They need a lot of help on learning how to be a man. Are you kidding? Yes, Arnold. Yes, you just said it. And you're right. And Arnold, the reason your knee-jerk reaction was to say, men don't need a class how to be a man, because you don't. You never did, because you came out of an era, a rough and tumble era, post-war Austria. You were an alpha male from fucking age 5. And you hung around alpha males your whole life in the gym in an era where alpha males were common. 60s, 70s, 80s, early 90s. Of course you didn't, but men today do. You see how this works? Moving on. We're almost done. If I could tell these men and women anything, it would be to turn off social media, think about your biggest insecurity, and go start working on it out in the real world. I agree 100%. Go outside, exercise, talk to real people. Agree. Not big on the talk to real people part because I'm an introvert, but I understand. Go outside, yes. Exercise, yes. I'm in that gym 4 days a week, minimum. Stop listening to these influencers and what they think you need. They are selling you. That's true, they are. And before anyone says I'm throwing shade at someone specific, I just learned all about this how to be a man stuff recently when a reporter said to me that I was the antithesis of the few of these shysters I hadn't heard of. And I couldn't believe it is happening. So he's new to this red pill world or alpha male world or whatever. But I'm happy to be here to provide a positive voice on social media and the internet. And again, I'm not an expert. If you're struggling, get help. That takes real strength. I understand his reaction. He probably had never seen anything like red pill in his life, and he went, what the fuck is this crap? And immediately had a knee-jerk, well, that's crap. However, red pill, as much as I disagree with a lot of red pill, I agree with a lot of it. I disagree with a lot of it. What I've said is, and I'm right about this, red pill is accurate on the diagnosis. Red pill is very weak on the prescription. Alpha Male 2.0 is very strong on the prescription. It acknowledges the diagnosis, and then it moves on very quickly and gets right into the problem solving. Because that's where success is, that's where happiness is. Not about, oh, does this suck all day. I love Rollo Tomasi, but do you need to watch or listen to another 3-hour video about him talking about hypergamy again? It's all diagnosis. I'm sure Arnold saw something like that and went, Jesus Christ, and immediately said, you don't need this stuff. As much as red pill, we could argue with some points of red pill, it's there for a reason. If men weren't the babies, Arnold, that you just said they were, because you're right, there wouldn't be a red pill. You wouldn't have guys like Jordan Peterson being worshipped the way he is, or Donald Trump being worshipped the way he is, if men were masculine men like they were in the 70s, where they're all hairy like, Burt Reynolds laying on the carpet in front of the fireplace. It was a masculine time. So that's it. That's the deal about Arnold throwing shade on the term alpha. He really isn't. Now you see the context. And now you see how he's actually right when he circles around to the real point and he's done contradicting himself. Love you, Arnold.